Good evening and welcome, everyone. We are thrilled that you have joined us tonight for this event. My name is Renee Battle Brooks, the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We are the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. And this year marks our 50th anniversary of the founding of our office. And this program tonight is just one of the events that we're holding over the next 12 months. We celebrate the work of our agency throughout the years, and in particularly the legacy of one of the great advocates in Prince George's County. Her name was Teresa Douglas Banks. Mrs. Banks was an educator, a civil servant, a politician, an active member of her church, an advocate for wage parity, and much, much more. So we look to her life of service, her commitment to equity, and her fight for justice as inspiration today and throughout our own lives here in Prince George's County. So tonight, I am delighted to welcome you as we consider how do we deal with COVID, social injustice, and polarization. It's brought to you in partnership with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and the Rumi Forum as we celebrate World Interfaith Harmony Week. So let's take a moment to break down those four words, World Interfaith Harmony Week. So what does world mean? It means that all of us, you, me, your immediate neighbors, everyone down the road from you in the next town over, the states, our nation. That's what the world means, other nations as well. Interfaith. As humans, we share spiritual identities. For some of us, that identity or world
All right, so I think Renee's having a little bit of internet problems. So I'm just going to jump in here and just conclude her welcome to everybody here on behalf of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. It is our pleasure to welcome you. Renee was reviewing the idea of World Interfaith Harmony Week. And she talked about the concept of world, what it means, from your family members to your neighbors to the, your communities and the nations, and then interfaith, and that we all share an identity of faith. For some of us, that identity is not having any faith. Some of us, that identity is as Buddhists, Sikh, Muslims. There's across the board, we share this identity of spiritual people, no matter how we identify. And then harmony. And one of the things we think about is harmony. And our friend Renee, who was with us, is a musician. And so one of the things we think about is like, what does it mean to be in harmony as a musician? And you think about that and how there's so many different instruments and they provide different sounds, but all those sounds come together, create this beautiful, incredible melody. And so for us in our work, we see that the many different voices of so many different people bring that harmony to us. I do see Renee is back. So Renee, I'm going to give this back to you here. And thank you so much. Here you go. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, you're muted. There you go. There you go. You're back, Renee. Sorry.
Yeah. So thank you. Kyla was beautifully saying it. It's really about coming together. And so, I mean, really the appeal isn't that us, right? You, me, our neighbors, our community, our nation, our world, many different voices coming together to create something wonderful. So tonight we have three special guests who you will learn more about later. We have Rahmah, Abdulaleem, we have Rabbi Abbi Sharofsky, and we have Pastor Charles Tapp. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ibrahim Anli. He's the Executive Director of the Rumi Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee. And thanks to our partners this evening, Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and Prince George's County Memorial Library System for their collaboration in making this gathering possible. And I offer a warm welcome to all of our participants this evening and our constellation of speakers whom we look forward to hearing from. So this event, being a collaboration of Prince George's County offices and Rumi Forum, is happening within the sidelines of the World Interfaith Harmony Week that we try to observe every year with different forms of events and collaboration. And it is also, as we all welcome and celebrate and cherish, happening during the Black History Month. So we hope this event's conversation will align the key messages of those important focal times, the Interfaith Harmony Week, the Black History Month, and from a window of contemporary issues, social injustice, polarization, and the restrictive impact of COVID on our lives. So we do look forward to hearing from our speakers as they address those issues. And Rumi Forum, being a greater DC area institution dedicated to interfaith dialogue, is always supportive of the collaboration that brings clergy, scholars, community leaders, faith and interfaith leaders from a variety of backgrounds. I thank wholeheartedly again for everyone for their involvement in this evening's exchange and look forward to a fruitful conversation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mehmet Sarakoglu. I'm the Public Affairs Director at Rumi Forum. And tonight I would like to introduce you our panelists. And first of our panelists is Rahmah Abdulaleem. She is the Executive Director of KARAMAH, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights, where she works to create a global network of advocates knowledgeable about the gender equitable principles of Islam and are able to advance the cause of Muslim women's rights in legal and social environments. She advocates for civil rights, religious freedom, empowerment, and justice for women. She graduated from Duke University with a double major in religion and sociology with a certificate in markets and management studies. Ms. Abdulaleem obtained her JD from University of Michigan Law School and worked at a top international corporate law firm for 14 years. I would like to welcome Ms. Abdulaleem, Executive Director of KARAMAH.
Thank you, Mehmet, and thank you, Mehmet's sidekick. It is a pleasure to be here. I really want to thank the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and the Rumi Forum for inviting me to speak on this topic today. So I always like to talk about my background, to really start people from my beginning. I grew up in Philadelphia, and it has a very large African-American Muslim population. So growing up, I didn't know that everyone, didn't have these like large groups of people that were with them. And my father's an imam. And so for people who aren't Muslim, imams are similar to rabbis and pastors. And my entire childhood, every time I did something good, he would say, "Oh, you're born for the mission." And I would, as a teenager, preteen, roll my eyes and be like, "What is he talking about? What mission is he talking about? He needs to stop watching Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever it is." I never really understood it. But as an adult, I have learned to appreciate that comment of born for the mission. Because every time I thought that something wasn't going right, and I was like, "Oh, that's not my plan. That's not where I wanted to go." He said, he would always remind me, "You're born for the mission. You're born for the mission." And so I got the opportunity to participate in KARAMAH's Law and Leadership Summer Program, which was a transformative experience for me. And a couple months later, they asked me to be their executive director. So I was like, is that really what I want to do? And so I asked him, and he lit up like, he was like, "Oh, it's the mission. It's the mission." And I was like, "What are you talking about? why are you still talking about this mission? But now I really, over the past few years, have really started to discover what he meant by being born for the mission. And especially during these times that so much seems to be everything we're looking at. It's like, is it everything in the glass half empty? It's like COVID. How much longer do we have to deal with it? You know, another social injustice thing is happening. I mean, will it ever end? We're so polarized on everything. Everything is political. Everything's like not the same. I can look at something totally different from my neighbor. And you could really get to the point where you're just like, nothing is working. Nothing is right. And what I always tell people at this time when people ask me, you know, like, how am I still smiling? How am I still happy? I say, first of all, you know, it's part of being a person of faith is that I rely on my faith when things don't seem to be making sense to me. And what I constantly rely on is in our holy book, the Holy Quran, chapter 94, verse 5 and 6. And it says, verily, with every difficulty, there is relief. Verily, with every difficulty, there is relief. And just saying that mantra over and over again reminds me constantly that, you know what, even though I don't see it, even though it doesn't really make sense to me, there's going to be relief here. There's going to be something positive that comes out of it. Every bad thing that we know is happening, it's like, and you just have to think about examples instead of focusing on so many people have gotten COVID, so many people have died, so many people are sick. You know, my job isn't the same. I lost my job. Instead of focusing on that, we need to focus on the positives that came out of COVID. Think about the positives that came out of, you know, being on lockdown. The ability to spend more time with your family. You know, we have to always start to think about the positives that have come out of things. Even social injustice, when we're thinking another one of these instances of police brutality or gun violence or anything that's happening, war, you're like, oh, human beings, what are we doing? And we need to constantly say, you know what has come out of it is deeper conversations, getting to know people who aren't like you and really talking through some issues and really kind of getting to the heart of the matter that we're all human. And we really need to think about, even when we're talking about social injustice, it has been a long time coming. We have known that we have been polarized for years. And it might have been in small circles we were polarized and people were focusing on their faith. But as a Muslim here in the United States, we are one of the most diverse populations. And so it's always fascinating to me, even dealing with fellow Muslims on issues, because I see things one way because of my background. And other Muslims, they're like, really? That's what you got from that same exact thing that we watched? And really learning about one another. I have a good friend, PJ, he's from the Baha'is. And I saw him say this one time, so I always give him credit. And he says, you know, think about the beauty of the garden. It is not just one type of flower, it's a multiple of flowers. It's so many different varieties of flowers. And I think that what we need to think about during World Interfaith Harmony Week is that all of our religions, all of us as humans are like beautiful flowers. We're all different, but together we make such beauty. And we really need to focus on the beauty we make together instead of saying, you're different. I don't like you. I mean, I once had a secretary who hated lilies. And lo and behold, whenever someone sent me lilies, she's like, why are they sending you lilies? I was like, let's focus on the niceness of the flowers. I know you don't like lilies. Let's take it to another floor. But really learning to live together and really relying on whatever spiritual basis we have. I thought it was beautiful what Kyla said that, you know, even if you have no religion, you know, background, you still have the human spirit is connected. And during World Interfaith Harmony Week, I want to remind people that even when people are not religious, that does not make them any less human. That does not deny their humanity, and connecting our spirits together. And so I say to my fellow humans, and I really remind my fellow Muslims all the times that when we're really thinking that everything is down and out, I remind them of chapter 94, verses 5 and 6. Verily, with every difficulty, there is relief. Some people say ease. Verily, with every difficulty, there is ease. But really reminding us for Muslims that the word of God really says to us that, you know what? there's going to be a difficulty, but there is going to be relief, and that there is going to be relief. And reminding people that if you can't get to relief, sometimes I realize that religion is not enough. And I just want to make this, public statement that, you know what, if you are having problems and you need to talk to someone, mental health is something that we have really learned a lot about over this last 2 years of COVID. Mental health is something we need to take seriously. If you need mental health help, please get it. Because don't be like, oh, well, if I just pray harder. If you know you need help, please get the help that you need. Because that's one of the beauties of being human, is that we can ask each other for help. So during World Interfaith Harmony Week, I'm so excited to be on this panel with the rabbi and pastor, because we can really talk about ways in which we can restore our humanity by really focusing on our human spirit together. And I really think that that is the most important thing that we can do right now, is to really, build on the resilience of the human spirit, build on the resilience of the American spirit, whatever really moves you. Because some people are like, because we're American, we can get through this. If that's what moves you, that's what moves you. But really think about how we can really, really get through this together. And I think the beauty of World Interfaith Harmony Week is the harmony of working together. That is what really is focused on, is that the faiths need to work together in one human spirit to combine our humanity together and really restore, reconcile, and really live with that resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahmah, and thank you for seeing the glass half full and being an eternal optimist over all these issues. And we appreciate your remarks, and we are looking forward to the conversation. Next, we have Rabbi Abbi Sharofsky. She is the Jewish Community Relations Council's Director of Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence. She studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary and was ordained in 2012. Abbi holds a master's degree from the Davidson School of Jewish Education, specializing in experiential education. Abbi was the Deputy Director of Jewish Welfare Board, Jewish Chaplains Council, where she worked with Jewish military personnel and veterans. Thank you so much for your service. Rabbi Sharofsky is the recipient of the 2016 J. Pro Young Professionals Award for her dedication to the Jewish community through her work in the nonprofit field. She is a 2018 Fellow of Rabbis Without Borders Fellow. Rabbi Sharofsky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here and to be sharing this space with so many people of faith and people who are engaged in this work and care about this work. So thank you so much to the Department of Office of Human Rights of Prince George's County and Rumi Forum. And if I've forgotten anyone, I say thank you. So hopefully with that generous spirit, we will we'll all understand. So as was said, I'm a rabbi, and I like to open up whatever I teach and whenever I speak, sharing some words of Torah, some words from the Jewish Holy Scriptures. And the Torah that I'd like to share right now is actually from the weekly portion that each week Jews around the world read a set portion, a set number of verses and chapters from the Torah. And this week's portion is known as Truma. So it's in the book of Exodus. For those of you following along at home, I'm looking at Exodus chapter 25 in the opening verses. And what I'm always kind of moved by this parsha, by this portion, because it comes after all of these really amazing and powerful things. There's laws, there's the giving of the commandments at Sinai. There's been this really amazing and miraculous journey that the Israelites have gone through. And now they're being told it moves from this very dynamic, revelatory experience to what I once termed in a sermon as the IKEA catalog of the, of the Bible, where this is how we're going to build build the tabernacle, build the Mishkan. And and I say that with a certain amount of, I know that's a rather flippant statement, but I also say it with what does it mean that we've had this glorious experience, and now we are really dealing with this minutia, with the details. And I think that the importance of getting into some of these details is about what does it mean for us to have to focus and like really drill down and hyper focus in on something. And the line that always sticks out for me, there are two that I'd like to share. And the first is part of Exodus 25, verse 2. Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts, and you shall accept gifts from me from every person whose heart so moves them. And that's a beautiful idea to me, that it's not only the rich can bring it, or only those who have enough, or only those who make the most beautiful things, but it's as your heart so moves you. And I think one of the things that we see is that, especially when times are difficult, we want to help. We want to do more. We want to push ourselves to be able to do everything to help those around us. And yet what we really need to be doing is thinking not just how are we doing the biggest or the most, but how are we doing something that is attainable for us. I can't donate $50,000 to something, but I could donate 50, or I could donate 10, and that could go a lot. That's still a meaningful thing. Or what about someone who can put forward their services, who are able to craft this magnificent piece of the Israelites, history and journey. What does it mean that everyone gave something? And what I'm also thinking, though, about at this point in the pandemic, how are we giving when it's difficult? We're stretched to the limit. Clergy burnout, the Great Resignation. I look at our teachers, our medical professionals. People are tired, and we've been giving for so long. What is it that helps us to continue to give? What is it that helps us continue to put ourselves out there and continue to show up? And I echo my I echo what Rahmah said earlier. It's that finding that inner resiliency, and finding that, even when it becomes hard, there are points that we can still push through. And one of the things that I see in the verses that follow, after the different gifts are described, and it's gold and silver and purple yarns and dolphin skins. Where are they getting dolphins in the Bible, in the desert, and all of these different oils and spices and stones? We get to Exodus 25, verse 8, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And I love that. People are bringing all that they can so that they can create a space for God to be among them. And it's not about it being, it's gifts that are coming from one's heart, and that push that we are constantly moving towards, that forward motion, is really what is helping to build that holy space. And that the holy space is to me, less about the things and more about the intention. What I would also like to share is I want to share a poem, because I think one of the challenges that we experience right now is, how are we keeping that sanctuary? How do we keep that holy dwelling place even when it's hard? And thinking about our society, our polarization, one of my favorite poems, is by regarded as one of Israel's best poets, Yehuda Amichai, poem entitled "The Place Where We Are Right." From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Wow. Too often today, we need to be right. We need to be right, and we need to be more right than the person next to us. We always need to know better. But it's not helping anything. It's not helping anyone. And when we need to be right, what we're doing is overriding the humanity of others. Right now, there's so much that people are, pushing, what is going to be the best move forward? What is going to be our next step? And we don't know. And it's not about what I pick from that poem is it's not about being right. It's about the doubts and loves, because it starts with doubt, and it starts with a willingness to be uncomfortable in spaces and learn and grow together. When we can truly be not okay with everything and say, I just don't know. I'm really not sure. Let me learn from you. Let me hear what you're saying. Let me hear your pain. Let me hear your frustration. When we can start to come together, put down some of our own stuff, our own baggage, and then be able to really just jump into it, that's where we start to get to that place where we can rebuild that house, where we can keep that holiness and we can keep ourselves going. So my hope and my blessing here in this is that we find a place to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, and we learn how to engage in a way that we can really see each other in our humanity for all of the difficulties that it brings, and be okay with the imperfections. Thank you for having me, and thank you for hearing my Torah.
Thank you, Rabbi Sharofsky. And when you read that poem, the poem that came to my mind is Rumi's "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there." So that was very powerful. The poem that you just read, talking about not being right, but starting with doubts and going beyond what we can do. So thank you so much. Next, we have Pastor Charles Tapp. He was elected as the president of the Potomac Conference Corporation of Seventh-day Adventists in March of 2021. In this role, he leads close to 40,000 members and 220 pastors and teachers on a path to individual discipleship and spiritual maturity. Prior to taking this post, Pastor Tapp served as senior pastor of the Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church for nearly 40 years, and in many scenarios, Tapp has served as a pastor, professor, administrator, writer, and radio television host, sharing God's love and saving grace with the world. Prayer is at the center of his life and the way he leads the ministry of Sligo Church. Pastor Tapp, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And let me join my colleagues in thanking the Prince George's County of Human Rights and the Prince George's County Memorial Library for the invitation to be with you here tonight. In March of 2020, when the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, in response to the rising cases of COVID infections, put into effect the prohibition of large gatherings of 250 or more, congregations were in angst over what was taking place. Anxiety went across our region and across our state, and houses of worship were not exempt. At the time, I was the senior pastor of a 3,000 member congregation, which included individuals from all walks of life, nationalities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Like many churches throughout our region, we literally closed the doors of our churches to in-person worship and settled for live streaming over the internet as the most viable option. Of course, we always streamed our worship services from week to week, but we never did it to an empty church. But nevertheless, we pushed forward because in the back of our minds, we knew that we needed to do our part. And of course, this was only going to be temporary. This would only last for maybe a few weeks or a month or two at the most. But as we all know, in many cases, that was thought to be temporary. For many houses of worship, it simply became a way of life. But as challenging as this pandemic has been, and you know it has been challenging, there have been some silver linings, especially when it comes to the church. Because as strange as it may sound, when we were forced by COVID and this pandemic to close the doors to our churches, inevitably, our eyes were opened to something just as daunting. What was it? The social injustice in our world that all the while have been staring us right in the face. You see, the closing of our doors opened our eyes to the senseless loss of life by the hands of those who had sworn to protect it. It opened our eyes to those who had lost their jobs, and their jobs had placed them in imminent danger because of this pandemic. And yes, it opened our eyes to the plight of the immigrant who had come to this land in search of nothing more than a way to provide for their families. In essence, the COVID-19 pandemic has opened our eyes so that we might be forced to take a fresh look at the social injustice right here in our own backyards. And you see, for the Christian faith, justice is an extremely important to us because it helps us to recognize that justice is not a human construct, but rather it is something that began in the very heart of God and is revealed in Holy Scripture. Now, who among us, regardless of our faith tradition, is not familiar with the words from the Old Testament book of Amos, chapter 5 and verse 24, made famous by the slain civil rights leader, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous I Have a Dream speech when he said these words, "But let justice roll down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream." And of course, the words of Jesus and his famous Sermon on the Mount, and where we are told to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And in the language in which these words were written, the words justice and righteousness are the very same word. You see, justice and righteousness, in simple terms, is simply what God desires in any and every situation. So in essence, justice is what ought to be. Justice is what should be. Justice for the Christian is not what ought to be just for us, but it's what ought to be for all of humanity in each and every situation. I believe this idea is best articulated in Jesus' own words when he said, do unto others, treat others in the manner that you would want them to treat you. Today, we refer to these words as the golden rule, but sadly, too many in our society today have chosen to live by another rule, another golden rule, which says, whoever has the gold is the one that rules. But this is the antithesis of what it means to be a Christian. It's the antithesis of the Christian faith. For the Christian faith teaches us that the very things that you and I desire for ourselves, we should desire those same things for others. If we want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then I, as a Christian, should desire life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for others as well. And not only should I desire it for them, I should use my voice and my resources and power to make sure that they can acquire those very same things, especially for those whose voices have been muted by the systems of oppression deeply ingrained in our society today. You know, I'm reminded of the poetic words of the German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, who wrote in 1946 when he titled his poem, First They Came. First they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. But then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Justice isn't just for the Christian or for the Jew or for the Muslim or for the atheist or for the agnostic, but justice is what ought to be for all humanity. So whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or espoused to no political affiliation at all, as a Christian, it's my God-given responsibility to use my voice and to use my means to ensure that what ought to be for you should be and must be. Yes, the doors to many of our churches, they had to close due to COVID-19. But in closing the doors to our churches, I believed that it opened our eyes. It opened our eyes to the reality that is. But the real test of our faith for the Muslim, for the Jew, and yes, for the Christian, is not just in the opening of our eyes. The true test of our faith is when we're ready to open our hearts. And that's when we'll know what justice truly is. The justice that is not for some, but the justice that should be for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor Tapp. We really appreciate those beautiful remarks that reminded me of the business card of my mentor, Rabbi, while I was a graduate student at the University of Kentucky. It said, justice is not just us. So making that very clear, saying the reality is what is going to open our hearts, because opening our eyes is not important, not enough to reach to the desired place that we can be at. So to all the panelists, Ms. Abdulaleem, Rabbi Sharofsky, and Pastor Tapp, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation that we are about to have. Your remarks have been very helpful to start off this Q&A session. And the diversity is one of the things that Maryland is very blessed and very much appreciating in their own communities. That diversity is also showing itself in different ways when we are thinking about helping others, charity, as Rabbi Sharofsky mentioned, bringing gifts of every kind and at any value. But working in harmony, how we can open our hearts, to go back to Pastor Tapp's remarks. How is it working? How we can do it better? And what are the things that we need to do to make it more visible and for everyone to participate and volunteer?
You know, when I was pastoring this 3,000 member church, it had over 100 different people groups. And I would always remind them that diversity is our greatest asset. But in the same breath, I would tell them diversity is also our greatest challenge. But without diversity, there can be no true unity. Because in true diversity is not uniformity. It's our differences that when we come together around a common good, they can truly form what I call unity. And I think, as I said earlier, when Jesus talked about, you know, in the golden rule, Matthew 7:12, treat others the way you want to be treated. If we just did that one thing, if we just follow that one precept to treat our neighbors, whoever those individuals are, the way we want to be treated, it may not change the world overnight, but it would change someone's world for sure.
And just building on that, the name of my organization is KARAMAH, which means dignity. And that comes from a verse in the Quran that, you know, God has given dignity to all the children of Adam. And I think that what we really need to focus on is that they didn't say a specific group. They didn't say all Muslims, all Christians from this certain county, from this certain city. We really need to focus on all the children of Adam and really focus that we're all the children of Adam and that we need to work together in order to really, you know, thrive here in the world. Is that no one can really thrive by themselves. We need to thrive as a community, and community work is the best work, I think. And working together is the way we can actually thrive as we continue on.
I'll add something too. So I want to say, Mehmet, I totally understand. I've had my child in the scene, and this is also part of COVID and the diversity of how we are all living right now. So there's a certain amount of grace, I think, that we've all given each other during these times. But the verse that was coming to my mind, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. That this idea of, you know, it's like the golden rule. Each tradition has something like this. What I like about this idea of, you know, love your neighbor as yourself, it isn't just, you know, it's understanding that there is, you know, we can be critical with ourselves, but we also know that we're not perfect. We're not, you know, but at the end of the day, we're trying to do the right thing. So it's giving this benefit of the doubt is also where I see this. When we talk about the golden rule, when we talk about love your neighbor as yourself and dignity, it's knowing that we're all moving through this with a certain amount of imperfection, and we're trying to get through it together. So we give each other that grace.
Thank you so much for being so gracious. I'm living this right now. So, and you mentioned some of the challenges. Rahmah mentioned mental health, but there are other challenges that the communities are facing. Poverty is being one of them, mental health. How are we equipping our communities with resources, with right people, right help at the right time? What are the shortcomings, and what can we do more as community leaders / faith leaders and nonprofit organizations? What are the steps that we can take in the short term and carry that on with the help of others, including the federal government, but mostly what we can do in our own communities?
You know, I think for the community of faith, and I'm sure my colleagues might agree with this, that has been a challenge for us. Because so many times in our faith traditions, we want to ignore the mental health issues. Well, let's just pray about it. Let's just fast and pray it away. So how can we deal with such a pivotal issue in our world right now that has been magnified even more so, intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic, when we as a faith tradition are not even really willing to be honest with ourselves and say, listen, yes, the church has a problem. The faith community has a problem. And until we are able to be honest with ourselves and look in the mirror and see ourselves for who we are, how can we be part of the solution for the communities that we've been called to serve? So I think the first step is just being honest with ourselves and come to a reckoning that this is an issue that impacts even people of faith.
So within the Jewish community, lots of services, lots of resources, I would say a broad part of the Jewish community, certainly not all, we're not monolithic. Mental health care is normalized. It is something that is accepted, and it's okay. However, the people that are providing the care, especially the clergy, are experiencing burnout at a never before seen rate, and I know that it's happening in the Christian world, and I'm not entirely familiar with how it's going in the Muslim world, but I can't imagine that it's any different. So while it's the yes, the flock needs care, but who's caring for the shepherd? Who's caring for the caregivers? Who's making sure that our clergy, that our leadership of the different organizations, that our lay leaders who have been putting together our services, our schools, our everything for 2 years now, who's caring for them? And what are we as communities putting in place to care for them?
And I will just say that for Muslims, I really stress that we should spend these next time. I got something in the mail yesterday that said 60 days until Ramadan. And for Muslims, that is, similar, I'm sure, to Rabbi can say you have some Jews that only come for the high holidays. And I know Pastor Tapp said, you'll only see some Christians for Easter and Christmas. For Muslims, there are some Muslims you only see during Ramadan. And with these past 2 years, not being able to see people in person, some people have become really disconnected from their local masjids, which is the Arabic term, or mosque that you're more used to, or their local communities, and really finding ways to still have that sense of community and finding ways of really spreading the love of your faith to others. So even right now, this time of, as you're preparing for Ramadan, giving to the poor, helping your neighbor when necessary, preparing yourself for this spiritual time that Muslims are coming up to, and really acknowledging that everyone is not doing okay. So it's not just mental health, it's the increase in domestic violence that's been happening. So many imams have contacted me and said, what should we tell them? I'm like, tell them to call a domestic violence hotline, because you are not equipped to help them. And just little things like that. Or, you know what, we need to find who has the food, food kitchen. A lot of local masjids are having food banks that people can do drive-bys and pick up food. It's really connecting people to resources, because what COVID has shown us is that a lot of people live in food deserts. A lot of people did not know where their next meal was coming from. And as someone who can go downstairs and open the refrigerator and be like, I don't want anything in here, I have to realize that there's a lot of people in our community that cannot do that. And as a faith community, I think that this time of COVID is really showing us how we need to love and help one another more. I feel like we had gotten to a point where we were like, yeah, I'm helping enough. And this has shown us that we need to help more and really do. And I'm not saying money, as Rabbi Abbi said, it might not be money, but it could just be, you know what, I have this extra food that I know I'm not going to eat, and I pass someone homeless on the street, let me give it to them. Or the homeless shelter who's like, if you can do a meal for us, that would be wonderful. Just thinking about ideas of how you can give back to the community in these religious times. So as Muslims are preparing for Ramadan, really prepare yourself for Ramadan in the sense of charity for others, and really start the charity now. Don't wait till Ramadan and say, oh, I'm going to help people during Ramadan for the extra blessings. Build the blessings now.
And that's one of the silver linings, I believe, of this pandemic, is that when the doors of our churches were closed, the church left the building. And that was a good thing, because it helped us to come to the realization that the church is not the physical building, but it's the people of God. And we've been called to go beyond the walls, and we've been settling for staying behind the walls, taking care of ourselves. But when this pandemic hit, when those doors closed, many churches, many houses of worship, the congregants moved beyond the walls and went into the community, as Jesus said, to be salt and light. Salt does no good if it remains in the shaker. It is only good when it's sprinkled and makes contact with the food. And God is calling us. God, our creator, is begging us to be salt in a world and to be light in this world at a time where they're in desperate need of both.
Thank you. That was very powerful. Salt and light, and being present and a part of the community, not just the structure of the prayer building itself, but making this as a community. We have a question at the screen. I think everyone can read this. Can you recommend spiritual disciplines to maintain awareness of blessings and a sense of abundance in these times?
Well, one of the spiritual disciplines that I believe we need to practice as a community of faith, especially now, is the discipline of fasting, of denying ourselves of the food, the sustenance that we need, because it helps us to understand the plight of others. As was mentioned earlier, we're able to go to our refrigerator doors right now. Most of us are, and just go eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But everybody can't do that. Everybody's not as fortunate as many of us are. And when you take hold of the discipline of fasting, not only does it draw you closer to God, I believe it draws you closer to the needs of your brother and your sister, understanding that there are people who are fasting not because they want to fast, but they're fasting because they're being forced to fast because they have nothing in the cupboards.
So for me, I think about how we mark time as a spiritual discipline. And Rahmah, you had mentioned, Ramadan is coming, and what does it mean to do different acts and charity and everything during that time. I think about the period of time between Passover and Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, so that time of also known as Pentecost, so the 7 weeks where Jews count sort of a daily measure. And one of my dear friends and colleagues always would say, as we count each day, let's make the day count. And I think about what it means to live, to live with a certain amount of intentionality, but also if we're going through and looking at what, marking time as a spiritual practice, I think it also forces us to take care of ourselves. And I think that one of the things, at least I know for me, how I care for myself, am I making sure that I have time for my own peace of mind, that I'm, relaxing, whatever relaxing looks like at these days, I don't know. But am I making sure that I am able to take the time that I need so that I can function the best that I can for others? And I think that by incorporating a sense of, maybe it's what is the calendar over a period of over a period of several weeks, but also how are we shaping our day? I know that in Judaism as well as in Islam, there are set times during the day to pray. And how are we marking those times and the time that we spend in between it? So there's never enough time, but I also think that it's a one way to help us ground ourselves and center ourselves.
And just building on what Rabbi Abbi just said, really, this discipline of prayer and actually taking the time, instead of just looking at it as a ritual, actually reconnecting. I think for too often, at least a lot of Muslims, They're like, oh, I just got to get the 5 prayers out of the way, and I have it memorized. Just let me get. And instead of really connecting and taking that time to exhale, to reconnect, to recenter themselves. And I think that discipline of really making your prayers count, really not making your prayers just something you're checking off a checklist. I'm a personality type that I write things down on the checklist so I can cross them off. I know that about myself, but really taking the time to just stop and pray and really stop and think. I think that is a discipline that, especially for other faith traditions, when you are really getting to the point where you don't know, stopping and actually praying, not just saying, let me say this really quick prayer and it's going to change it like that, really reconnecting. And so I think that's a discipline that we really need to build on to really reconnect.
And if I could continue along those lines, when you look at the Christian tradition, and you look at what Jesus gave us, the Lord's Prayer, he said, pray this way, our Father, which means as we draw closer to him, we are also recognizing and acknowledging that you're my sister and you're my brother. He didn't say pray my Father. He said pray our Father. So it gives us, again, that sense of community. So when I pray, I'm not just praying for my needs, but I'm praying for our needs as a community as well.
Well, I think for our discussion, which is centered around the 3R concept, reconciliation, restoration, and resiliency, I couldn't ask for a better panel than you being present with us tonight. Thank you all for being here tonight. And on behalf of Rumi Forum, thank you to our event partners, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and the Office of Human Rights, who welcomed us here for one of their 50th anniversary events. I particularly want to thank each of our panelists, Rahmah, Abdulaleem, Rabbi, Abbi Sharofsky, and Pastor Charles Tapp, for your wisdom, insight, and time this evening. We hope this event would inspire hope, instill an urgency, and drive people to act to bridge the divides in our society so that we can heal and be whole once again. Thank you all.
Thank you.